You're watching Local Access, Channel 29, exclusive programming for Comcast subscribers.
Hello and welcome to Civil Discourse, a program sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida. My name is Ken Hurley. Now I want to ask, how does one advance peace education? How does one advance peace through education? Is that a part of our school curriculum? And why is there so much unnecessary violence in our world? Locally, why is there so much unnecessary violence? Is peace truly a goal that is attainable? Is it something that we truly aspire to? What are we talking about when we say peace? Our guest in the studio is Dr. Candice Carter, an associate professor at the College of Education and Human Services Curriculum and Instruction at the University of North Florida. Dr. Carter's research broadly includes the dynamic ways that peace is developed through education. She examines policies for and pedagogies of peace-oriented education within the United States and around the world. Dr. Carter maintains a webpage called the Peacemaker Site, which is a service to those who seek information and resources for peace facilitations. And you can see that at www.peacemaker.st. She also has a book out called Chicken Soup for the Soul: Stories for a Better World, to which Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a Nobel Prize Peace Laureate, and President Jimmy Carter, another Nobel Peace Prize Laureate, are among the contributors. Muhammad Ali said of the book, "Every story is a vision of peace for our future." Here's my challenge to you as you read this book. Open your minds, listen with your heart. You can make a difference. Welcome, Candice. Welcome. Thank you for being our guest on Civil Discourse today. You call yourself a student of peace, yet you teach peace. Is that a paradox?
Well, you can't teach what you don't know. There's a book entitled that, so it's obvious that teachers are students, and you learn with your students as well as around them before you get them, and after they leave, all the insights they give you. So you're always a student when you're teaching.
Now we're going to talk about the book Chicken Soup for the Soul. This is a great book. It's very inspirational. It's a whole series of chicken soup books. You were a contributing editor and a contributing author to this book, among all sorts of other good people that write all sorts of inspirational stories there. But first I want to talk a little bit about your webpage, the Peacemaker Site. What can people expect to find when they look at that?
Well, I set it up for resources to help people actually looking for organizations, particularly nonprofits, but also schools where they could get formal training in peace education, where they could find outlets for their motivations to help others. So I set it up basically for resources.
Well, there's lots of organizations that purport to proffer and further peace education and what peace is. We have some locally. Wage Peace is a local organization. Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice is another local group. And there's lots of individuals who are living a peaceful life, leading by example. But yet we have so much senseless violence. The murder rate in Jacksonville is the highest per capita in the state of Florida. The Iraqi war was begun on a cloud of suspicion and doubtful reasons. We have violent conflicts around the world in Darfur, Rwanda, the Middle East, Asia, Central America. Terrorism focuses our minds on war. So tell me,
the list is endless.
The list is endless. So here's the question. Why is peace so difficult?
Why is peace so difficult? I think that people have trouble identifying it. when they're in it and knowing how to sustain that situation. And I don't, I think we conceive of peace as just a really difficult thing to achieve, and I hear that in you listing all these places of violence globally and locally, but not internally and interpersonally. And so I think we first need to see, where do we get the peace in ourselves? And when we can focus on how do we keep ourselves in a peaceful state, then we can go externally and look at how we can use that to facilitate peace elsewhere. But when we only look externally and we don't see the antecedents of that peace as in ourselves, it is difficult to identify.
How do you actually define peace? How does it begin? Is it just, do some people say, I want to live my life through the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, and that kind of, and that's a religious tenet throughout many, many different religions.
Universal.
But how have you, in your life experience, and you've lived a life seeking how to better teach peace, in order to teach it, you have to be able to define it. How do you define it?
Now, first of all, peace is defined differently by different people, particularly with cultural variation across humanity. But I oversimplify it for the sake of teaching peace processes. So I will define peace here with that mindset that it's getting your needs fulfilled. And when you can take care of your own personal needs first, and again, I'm talking internally and particularly cognitively, setting a mindset where you can take care of yourself and give yourself empathy and not seek it from others and fulfill your needs, then you can go help others. And parents know that. They know to take care of themselves. They tell you that on an airplane. Put on your oxygen mask first, then reach over and help somebody else. So when you can fulfill your needs, you may need help getting your needs fulfilled. When you can take care of that, you can then go help others.
How do you distinguish your needs versus, let's say, your wants? Is that a stumbling block where people say, confuse the two in terms of the creation of peace or the sustainable peace that we're seeking?
It's a major stumbling block in this very materialistic society, a very major stumbling block. I think all of our commercial consumerism has distracted us so greatly, we don't really know what our true needs are. And I mean, children, are not hardly ever trained anymore in highly resourced homes with entertainment without materials. How do they entertain themselves, right? And what is entertainment in itself? Is it going and helping somebody else and finding the joy of that relationship of working with others across generations and across cultural differences in the community? Or is it finding the latest game and getting highly stimulated and looking for more stimulus?
Well, how do you see the world? Do you see us being born into a world of peace, or born into a world where there's turmoil and strife and conflict and angst? Or does it differ depending on the birth, on who it is? And when does that process begin? Are we taught peace, or are we by nature a peaceful animal, those humans?
We're getting into philosophy here, and I will just quickly respond, because at the time I know you want to cover so much here, to say that we as humans are born into peace when our needs are taken care of, and that starts at conception. And if we're in an environment that is healthy for us, we start out with a peaceful start. And when we're in an environment that is not healthy for us, we don't start out having our needs fulfilled. We feel conflict right away, and conflict grows, right? So it starts right there, and then but it can start as a whole culture, as a whole nation. Are the needs being fulfilled? Are people working to take care of it internally and externally? If not, it will grow into something that will need a revolution for change, and it won't look very peaceful.
That's an interesting dynamic. Peace through force. We have bombs that are labeled peacemakers. We have police forces who are labeled peacemakers. And often that is not necessarily a misnomer, is it? I mean, if there is a group of people, let's say, take the strife that is happening in Darfur, or what was happening in the genocide in Rwanda, where based on race or based on somebody deciding I'm a better person than you because of these pedantic reasons, and I'm going to cut your head off because you're not like me. All right, now then we say, please don't do that, and we try to work with diplomacy, but yet diplomacy fails because they are so convinced of their way is right, and we bring in force to separate the group. When is force ever an acceptable way to attain peace?
That's a philosophical question, and most peacemakers in the world have said no, it is not. And the way you avoid the force is looking at the needs of the population that is bringing about violence, and addressing their needs in a nonviolent, non-forceful way, soliciting their needs and addressing their needs as best you can as another population. And it's very similar to interpersonal relations. When you bring in force, you beget force, and it increases and it increases. And even when the war stops, if it escalates to war, you have taught the use of force and violence is a way to resolve conflict, which is not a resolution. It's a delay of further violence.
Is this the kind of thing you teach at the University of North Florida? Can somebody enroll in a class like that where this kind of discussion is expanded on, and people go do homework assignments and write theses regarding this?
Well, we don't yet have a course dedicated towards peace at the University of North Florida. What we have done in the last year is we've created a program called Conflict Transformation, and we've just launched one at the graduate level, so students can come in, doctoral students now can make that a focus of their dissertations, and this is an educational leadership field. But we also have a certificate open to all graduate level students where they can take 15 credit hours, 2 required courses in processes of peace, and then 3 courses of their choice in their field where they look at conflict and how it's been resolved and proactively resolved. And proactive, we mean taking care of people's needs in organizations and interpersonally so that the organizations can go on in the field as advanced. So we are then developing undergraduate programs this year, so those will be available next year for students.
That's fantastic. Because it's such a dynamic, it's never-ending process, it seems, to aspire to peace. Do you think peace in our lifetime is attainable? Having people's needs met, and we're talking about the world now.
Right. Going back to the self, I've had peace all morning. I've had my needs met.
Well, that's good to hear.
But I passed people driving over here who haven't. And so are we talking about the self? Are we talking about society? Are we talking about the world? Or you've given me a very big question.
Right, I guess that is a big question. Well, but in terms of yourself, you have, when you say your needs have been met this morning, does that imply that maybe later on this afternoon they will not be as met, or maybe tomorrow? So it's a fluctuating thing, it's a high beta
What
thing
is a day
of
without
peace?
conflict? Have you ever had a day without conflict?
That's what life is to me. I mean, that's part of the adventure in some ways, right? I mean, I'm the ACLU guy in town. I'm very, not without conflict in my life or controversy.
So one of my needs for spiritual and emotional fulfillment comes from working out conflict nonviolently. It's very joyful to find a way to fulfill your needs and mine when we're in conflict.
Oh, that's interesting. So just a little thing like driving down the road can create what we call road rage, which is certainly not peaceful. But how does somebody then ameliorate that? How does somebody recognize the fact that they are becoming angry? And peace seems to be the absence of anger. Is that a fair statement?
No.
No?
It's the management of anger.
The management of anger.
Okay, so you recognize your feelings, and we're not very good at this in our culture, our national culture, because we look at everybody else and we tend to label others, but we need to look at our own. We need to identify our feelings. So you say, you have anger, you have road rage, right? I feel angry. That's how I feel right now. And you then go to, what are your needs at the moment? I need maybe to control the gas pedal so I don't put, it down to the floor and chase this person and create a dangerous situation, right? I need to use some self-control right now. I also need to understand that whatever the needs were of those people who set up the situation, maybe I need to have a little empathy there and say, they're probably running more late than me. Maybe their child was sick and they had to take their child to school, and now they're really late for filming this show, and they have a very pressing need. Or maybe they're just careless and they need to learn safety before they hurt themselves and somebody else.
Can this translate to our leaders in the world, the people in charge of our military, the people who can have the authority to actually wage war and do wage war? Do you think they are living peaceful lives or not living peaceful lives? We're going to take a short break. I want to get back and explore this a little bit more. I also want to talk about Chicken Soup for the Soul, Stories for a Better World, and I want to talk about your other webpage, the Journal of Stellar Peacemaking, www.jsp.st. We've got a lot to talk about with Candice Carter. Dr. Carter, thank you for being here. We'll be right back. You're watching Civil Discourse.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
In these turbulent times, let us not erode the liberties our country was built on.
Let it shine.
Larry Parker, National Honor Society student. Patricia Stevenson, stockbroker. Hector DeSario, systems analyst. Driving while black or brown isn't a crime. If it's happened to you, call us at 1-877-6-PROFILE and arrest the racism.
Welcome back to Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley. This is a program sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida, and we're talking about peace education with Dr. Candice Carter from the University of North Florida. And when we went to break, I was asking you about our world leaders and how you said peace, in some sense, is fulfilling one's needs. But let's take that to our world leaders. Are their needs being fulfilled? Let's say our President Bush, when we went to Iraq, was that a personal need, or was that a need for political reasons, economic gains? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I really can't speak to George W. Bush's personal needs and his feelings at that time. I can surmise what they are, all right, and that's all I can state. But and this is something we have to be careful of in communicating with others, to say, I know what you need and let me tell you what that is.
Okay,
right? We
sure.
need to deeply listen to others. In listening to him and observing, it seemed that he had a need to identify a conflict and address it, given the recent history of what our country had been through.
9/11.
Right, 9/11, and economic downturn, and all he had a need. He had several needs as a political leader, and it seems that that is what he was fulfilling. And you know that there's a lot of discussion around that. But if I were to communicate with him personally, I certainly wouldn't say, do you have a need to find an enemy that we can attack so that we can employ soldiers and industry? That wouldn't, you know, the cynical, the questions, that isn't something that we would want to ask. We would want to find out what is his need as a leader of our country, and how can we help him fulfill that? Is his need to find more information? He had a very pressing time frame there that he said himself, it seems, to find out were there nuclear weapons in Iraq.
Weapons of mass destruction.
So he had a need to get some information, and he had a lot of time pressure. It seems that fulfilling his need might have been to extend that time period and finding ways for him to do that as a leader of this country.
Okay. So, all right, how important do you think democracy is in attaining a sustainable peace?
Democracy is just one of many systems, and I certainly enjoy participating in it here, although I see ways that it doesn't work, and I teach about that with students and teachers in the schools. For instance, the majority vote. That leaves a minority, and the minority's needs are not met.
That's why we have a Bill of Rights, though, and that's why we have in part the ACLU to enforce the Bill of Rights, or try to give the Bill of Rights real meaning. But you're right, we do have a counterbalancing system of government in a democracy. When we have elected representatives elected by a democracy, what happens with the minority? Go ahead.
Right, and so I was giving you a context of just interpersonal and small group interaction and teaching. And so what I try to do in teaching with peace education is teach deliberation to consensus, which is so much more productive in meeting everybody's needs. And you can also do that in a democracy, right? But we do have these checks and balances, and we do have to watch out for domination of the majority, which is a constant problem in this nation and also in this society.
How about how important is a free flow of information and a dissemination of knowledge, freedom, in other words, in terms of a sustainable peace?
It's very important, but particularly so is free flow of non-commercial information that is not tainted by commercial interests and biased towards the interests of the sponsors of that information. So we teach students in the schools to read critically, to read between the lines and to read from multiple sources. One of the things we're doing in teacher preparation and in other programs at the University of North Florida, we're teaching them to break the habit of dichotomous thinking. Yes, no, right, wrong, simple answers. This works for the media, and you need to use that to make a story very quickly exposed, but it's not just right or wrong, yes, no. There are many, many perspectives within conflict, and we need to look at all of them and get all of that information.
What about equality? How important would you think that would be in terms of a sustainable peace? And dignity, the value and worth of another individual.
Of course those are important, and if I feel I don't have equal opportunity, and many people in our world do not, then I don't feel very peaceful.
Your needs are not met.
My need to feel having the same privileges as you, if any, are not fulfilled, and then I might build up some resentment towards you, and eventually that might come out. Even unplanned, it might come out
Systems
and
such as
display somewhere
slavery.
else.
Slavery would obviously build up resentment.
Well,
Racism is prevalent throughout the world still.
Especially here in
How do we
Jacksonville.
eliminate that? Is that a necessary obstacle to be removed in terms of hope for sustainable peace?
Well, certainly. I mean, whatever discrimination system is going on, the glass ceiling that is keeping people of color, women, sexually diverse people from being able to rise up in an organization because of discrimination against them.
Is diversity something we should embrace?
Oh, of course.
Celebrate?
How are we going to find peace if we can't diversely look at different solutions to our conflicts? We need different ways of thinking about it.
Well, talk a little bit about your book now, Chicken Soup for the Soul. Stories for a Better World. Can there was a story you were talking about during the break about rice. You talk a little bit about that.
Rice for Peace, it's a real short story in the book, but it's very powerful, and it's about, in the 1950s, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a religious-based group in this country that has a goal of facilitating peace, was sending little bags of rice to the White House, to the presidents, there to state, feed thine enemy, and don't use violence and don't use force again to end a war as we did in World War II with the horrific nuclear bombs. So they kept doing this over a decade, and they never heard anything back about their productivity or non-productivity of this campaign, but they kept it up for a decade. Kept sending little bags of rice to the White House, hearing that there was contemplation about bombing China. Does this sound current? Or of it, anyway, so they won't go there.
Okay.
We're just preparing for it nationally, but won't go there. So, but President Eisenhower then, in at least 2 meetings, and we know this from later data collections, asked his Joint Chiefs of Staff to hold on while he asked his secretary for a count on how many bags of rice had come into the White House. And they were in the thousands, and he said as long as so many of the American people wanted to feed the enemy, he certainly wasn't going to bomb them. So he never did use the bomb.
Well, he was a remarkable individual because he was a general. He understood the horrors of war. He lived through World War II. He executed some great strategic military operations and then became president. And one of his great speeches was the very last speech where he warned the Americans and the world about the multinational corporations and the military-industrial complex. And there's a nice movie out. It's called Why We Fight. I encourage people to go take a look at that, which talks about that. And you have now the Journal of Stellar Peacemaking, which is what? Now, it's a webpage, www.jsp.st. What is that?
I collected with my colleagues in peace research and education to produce the Chicken Soup book, 1,300 true stories from around the world. Many of these people wrote stories for us. I mean, when Oscar Arias Sanchez was here, the former president of Costa Rica, I asked him to write for the book, and he did. And he wrote the story of his president.
He's a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, another one.
Stories in the book. And so all these people, I mean, it's just amazing because they have jobs, they work for peace, and then I go, and they have families, and I go and ask them, would you write a story about what you do, right? So I felt this responsibility. I collected so many stories, and I was only allowed to put, or we were only allowed to put 101 in the Chicken Soup book. What to do with the rest? So anyway, I realized, and people keep sending me stories still, true stories about how they're developing peace. So I felt this responsibility to get the information out, and I also felt a greater responsibility to get it out non-commercially, because people around the world, particularly in developing countries, are reading this. And they don't have the money to come into these university programs around the world that are everywhere now to train in peace and conflict transformation, but they have a great interest. So I decided to put in the journal true stories, nonfiction, about how peace has been happening at any time, any place, in any way, research on the development of peace, and the arts. I strongly believe that the arts can communicate in ways that words cannot. So graphic arts and the performing arts.
Picture's worth 1,000 words. There's truth to that, right?
So the current edition, which is up right now and available, is still taking submissions, and it's focused on cross-border integration, how peace is facilitated through crossing borders, but also particularly through sustained relationships in that border crossing.
Now, you talked about the removal of commercial enterprise in this kind of discussion, yet there's a book out that's available in Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com. Are you getting paid for this?
The book, the revenue from the book is going to the Southern Poverty Law Center to support their work, because we so endorse it.
Morris Dees.
Morris Dees' work, and all the people who work there for him, and all the projects. And that brings it back to the schools, because we 4 co-authors, besides Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, are all peace educators. We all develop curriculum and work in the schools to support education for peace. And so we decided that the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center supports what we're doing. They produce a free journal in all schools that have lessons on how teachers can do this. They publish student work, so we want to support them.
Now, a couple other things. We're getting ready. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I'd like you to talk about Peace Awareness Day at UNF. I think this is something that is sponsored by Amnesty International. Are you affiliated with Amnesty International?
Right. I've been a member of Amnesty International for years, and when I came to Jacksonville, there wasn't an active group, so I started one at the University of North Florida, mainly for the university community. And the students came to me in the 2nd or 3rd year of the group, I'm still the sponsor of it, and asked if they could have a day to talk about peace, a campus-wide day to talk about peace. So they worked together and came up with the term Peace Awareness Day, and it's now in the 5th year of an annual event, and the community comes in, and we have groups from the community such as Wage Peace and many, many others. They come in and they share what has been going on locally to develop peace. And then we have the performing arts too. We have artists come in and do their poetry and dancers, and so it's very entertaining too.
It's funny, it's great. It's not funny, but to me what is a little bit unusual is the word amnesty. I mean, it comes from the Greek, and it means like the root of amnesia also. It's to forget, and in some ways to forgive. Isn't that the nature of amnesty in the meaning of that?
Exactly, they go together, and the idea is to reconcile, and reconciliation is a common term we can all understand now, but to bring back together people who have not had their needs met, and take care of them, and to forgive them if they are not criminals. If they've been convicted of a crime, as defined by their society, other than maybe freedom of speech, okay, then Amnesty International does not protect their rights. And students and people of the community who want to participate with this group can go to my Peacemaker website and hit the contact button, and they can contact me about anything we've talked about today.
Well, we're out of time, Candice. I appreciate the time that you've taken. You've been an excellent guest. I hope there's so much more to talk about. Maybe you can come back and we can continue this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Somebody once told me, be kind. Everybody you meet is fighting a battle. And certainly you're fighting the battle for peace, as it were, through education. I really appreciate it. You've been watching a program called Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley. We will see you next time. Thank you. You have been watching a public access television program called Civil Discourse, sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida. The ACLU is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. Our mission is to protect and advance the civil liberties and civil rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution, especially the principles contained in the Bill of Rights. We want to hear from you. Send us an email, share your views and opinions. If you're interested in appearing on the program, let us know. Friend or foe, we want you on the show. You may contact the ACLU in the following ways. Our telephone number is 904-396-5242. Our post office box is
5331 Jacksonville, Florida 32247, and our email address is aclujax@yahoo.com. My name is Ken Hurley. Thank you for participating in Civil Discourse.
Okay, we're in the open. Stand by. 5.
Welcome to The Turning Point, a show about education and literacy on Florida's First Coast. I'm Dr. Gail Florence Kane, president of the DePaul School of Northeast Florida, and here representing the Literacy Council of Jacksonville. Summer's coming, and we still have education on our minds. And I know a lot of parents have a time during the summer when they want to do